Episode 1, The Hymn That Never Ends. The bells of Saint Luria had not rung for 50 years. And yet, that night, they did. Their sound was heavy, not of metal, but of memory. It rolled through the misty streets, echoing off the cracked statues and ivy-choked walls, reaching even the sea where fishermen crossed themselves and whispered prayers. No one had pulled the rope. Everyone in town knew that. Sister Amara stood at the gate of the cathedral, her candle trembling in the wind. Her transfer had been sudden, a quiet post, they said. A chance to heal your faith. But as the final bell tolled its 12th chime, she realized nothing about Saint Luria was quiet. The great doors groaned open with a sigh that smelled of dust and salt. Inside, the air was colder, like a breath drawn from beneath the earth. Her light wavered across the pews, revealing rows of hymnals, each one open to the same page. Psalm 47. And then she heard it. A choir. Soft, distant, beautiful. Children's voices rising and falling in Latin harmony, pure as glass. For a moment, she closed her eyes and smiled. After years of doubt, after the silence of prayer unanswered, the sound of faith again filled her heart. But when she opened her eyes, the choir stalls were empty. Her candle flickered violently. The air thickened with something unseen, like invisible hands moving past her. The voices grew louder, not distant anymore, but above her, in the loft. Amara turned toward the spiral staircase. Every step moaned under her weight as she climbed toward the sound. "Hello," she called, her voice trembling. "Who's there?" The singing stopped. A single, fragile note lingered, stretching impossibly long until it broke, dissolving into a whisper that brushed her ear. We never stopped. Her candle went out. Darkness swallowed everything. For a heartbeat, she thought she felt the warmth of breath beside her cheek, the rustle of robes brushing past. She fumbled for matches, her pulse hammering in her throat. When the flame returned, she saw them faint impressions on the dust-covered floor. Bare footprints. Small, like those of children. Leading toward the organ. She followed. The organ loomed like a beast in slumber, pipes rising into the shadows. On its stand lay a sheet of music, handwritten, aged, titled simply, The Hymn of the Unending. She reached out to touch it, and the organ played itself. A booming chord shook the walls. Amara stumbled back, clutching the candle as every note filled the cathedral, the same hymn she'd heard before, but distorted now, minor, mournful, as if sung through water. And then came the voices again, dozens of them, weaving the same Latin words through the air. Dona nobis pacem, grant us peace. But in that peace, she heard screams. The walls seemed to breathe. The stained glass saints turned their faces away. Amara dropped to her knees, pressing her hands to her ears. The music grew unbearable, swelling into a storm of voices pleading, crying, harmonizing in perfect despair until it stopped. Silence. Only her ragged breathing remained. Then, in the faint light of her candle, she saw writing scrawled across the floorboards beneath the organ, as if carved by fingernails long ago. Those who sing for salvation must never stop. Amara rose slowly, the candle shaking in her hand. From somewhere deep within the cathedral, the bells began to toll again. And this time, she heard her own voice join the choir. Episode 2, The Last Note of Father Corvin. The next morning, Saint Luria was silent again. The mist had not lifted, and the town streets still carried that heavy echo of something unspoken. Sister Amara hadn't slept. The music from last night still clung to her skin like incense, haunting every heartbeat. When she entered the nave, she found a man waiting by the altar, tall, thin, with eyes like unlit candles. He introduced himself as Father Darius, the parish caretaker. His voice was low, the kind that sounded like it had learned to whisper in graveyards. "You heard them, didn't you?" he asked without looking at her. Amara froze. "The choir?" He nodded once. "They've been singing for more than 100 years. Since the night he died." He led her through a narrow passage behind the pulpit, down into a crypt that smelled of mildew and prayers forgotten. Dust floated in beams of pale light cutting through the cracks above. At the far end, a single coffin rested beneath a cracked marble plaque. Father Lucien Corvin. 1847 to 1893. He sang so heaven would listen. Father Darius opened a rusted box beside the tomb and took out a small wax cylinder and an antique phonograph. "They say this is the only recording left from his final mass," he said. "The night the hymn cursed them all." Amara hesitated, then turned the crank. The cylinder began to spin, scratching and hissing, until the faint sound of music emerged. A choir, yes, but wrong somehow. The harmony was fractured, uneven, voices breaking mid-syllable as if drowning. And over it, a single baritone voice, Father Corvin's, rose above the chaos, trembling, desperate. "Deliver them, Lord, even if you will not deliver me." A sharp crack ended the recording. Amara stared at the phonograph, her throat dry. He sacrificed himself? Or condemned them? Darius said quietly. "No one knows." The next morning, the entire choir was found dead in their stalls. Not a mark on their bodies. Just open mouths, frozen mid-song. As he spoke, Amara noticed something etched into the coffin lid, musical notes, carved deep and uneven. She brushed her fingers across them and felt warmth, faint but real. The melody pulsed beneath her touch, like a heartbeat. Suddenly, the church bells tolled again. Amara and Darius looked up toward the stairway. The bells should have been still, she had checked them herself that morning. But now, each toll carried a strange undertone, a hum, almost human, rising into a word. "Sing." The crypt walls trembled. Dust rained down. Amara stumbled backward as the phonograph spun again on its own. Father Corvin's voice returned, clearer now, filled with agony. To stop the hymn, one must finish it. Then silence. Father Darius crossed himself, whispering a prayer. But Amara didn't move. Her gaze was fixed on the coffin. The air around it shimmered faintly, like heat on stone. She could swear she heard a breath, from inside. A soft, rhythmic thud. Once. Twice. Then a low, broken hum, a single note, echoing from within the coffin. Father Darius whispered, "Dear God, he's still singing." Amara turned toward the stairs, her candle flickering. "Then we'll listen," she said, her voice trembling. "And we'll find out what he's trying to finish." As they left the crypt, the hymn rose once more from below, soft, endless, and terribly alive. Episode 3, Candlelight Mass. That night, Sister Amara decided to hold a private mass. No congregation. No witnesses. Just her, the candles, and whatever still lingered inside Saint Luria's walls. The storm outside had cut all power, so the cathedral was lit only by flame. Dozens of candles lined the pews and altar, trembling like nervous souls. Their light bathed the cracked marble saints in soft gold, but their faces seemed different tonight, less serene, more sorrowful, as if listening. Amara began the service in Latin, her voice echoing through the vast silence. Dominus vobiscum. Her words trembled but carried strength, a fragile defiance against the haunting that had claimed her nights. At first, everything felt normal. But as she raised the chalice, a draft of cold air swept through the cathedral, extinguishing half the candles at once. The flame on the altar bent sharply, every wick bowing in the same direction, toward the choir loft. She froze. The air was heavy again. Listening. And then, faintly, a hum. It began like the sigh of an organ warming up, a vibration in the bones more than the ears. Slowly, the hum turned to harmony, the same melody from Father Corvin's recording, sung in ghostly whispers. Amara set the chalice down, her eyes fixed on the loft above. No movement. No shadows. Only the sound of children singing through a wall of air. She whispered, "If you are soul-seeking peace, sing no more. You are free." The choir paused for a heartbeat. She thought they'd heard her. But then, a single female voice rose above the others, pure and trembling, singing her name. Amara. Every candle flared at once. The altar cloth rippled though no wind touched it. The hymn returned, stronger, closer, the voices circling around her now, whispering in overlapping verses of Latin and breath. She dropped to her knees. "Who are you?" The voice answered, soft, almost kind. "We are the ones who sang too long." Her candlelight dimmed to a dying ember. The church was nearly dark when she saw movement near the nave, the faint silhouette of a young girl in a white veil, standing among the pews. Her hands were clasped, her head bowed, like a child caught in eternal prayer. Amara's breath caught. "What do you want from me?" The girl lifted her head. Beneath the veil, her eyes were gone, hollow wells of silver light. When she spoke, it wasn't one voice, but many layered atop each other. "Finish the hymn." The pipe organ thundered to life, keys slamming down as if played by invisible hands. The sound tore through the cathedral, the hymn of the unending, twisting now into something darker, discordant. Amara clutched the crucifix around her neck, tears burning her eyes. The girl raised her hand and pointed toward the altar. There, on the open Bible, ink began to bloom across the page, dark red, like fresh blood. Words formed, elegant and deliberate. Deliverance begins with silence. And just as suddenly, the music stopped. Every flame died. Every sound vanished. Amara stood alone in the darkness, her heartbeat the only rhythm left. She tried to whisper a prayer, but her throat felt tight as though unseen fingers were pressing against it. From the blackness above, the choir exhaled one last note. A single, perfect amen. And Amara realized the truth. The choir didn't want to haunt her. They wanted her to sing with them. Episode 4, The Choir Without Faces. Morning came pale and colorless, as if the world had been drained of its dawn. Sister Amara awoke on the cathedral floor, her candle burned to a pool of wax beside her. The echo of the hymn still lingered, humming beneath the silence like the memory of a nightmare refusing to fade. She rose, every muscle trembling, and turned toward the loft, that shadowed balcony where the voices had come from. Last night, she had seen the girl. Heard her name sung. Now, she needed to see who or what was singing. The spiral staircase groaned under her weight. Dust fell from the beams with every step. The air grew colder, heavier, as though she were climbing into the lungs of the cathedral itself. When she reached the top, the choir stalls stood in two long rows of black wood, carved with angels whose eyes had been scratched out. Sheet music lay scattered across the benches, pages yellowed and brittle, but each written with the same title, Hymnus Eternum. The Eternal Hymn. The silence was unbearable. And then, she saw them. At first, she thought they were statues, figures seated in the choir stalls, motionless, heads bowed. But when her candlelight flickered across them, her breath caught. They were not statues. They were bodies. Dozens of them, robed in tattered choir garments, their skin gray and dry as parchment. Each one sat in a perfect posture of worship, hands folded, head slightly tilted upward as if waiting for a cue to sing again. Her candle trembled in her grasp. "Oh God," she whispered. Then she saw what was missing. Their faces. Each one's face had been smoothed away, no eyes, no mouths, no features. Only the faintest impression of where lips once were, as though time itself had erased their humanity but left their devotion intact. A gust of air swept through the loft, carrying with it the faintest trace of music. It didn't come from the dead. It came from the air itself, a hum that wound around her, soft, sorrowful, almost pleading. She stepped closer to the front row. A single choirboy sat nearest the organ, his hands clutching a wooden crucifix worn smooth by years of touch. When Amara reached for it, a voice whispered directly into her ear. "Don't wake them." She froze. The whisper had come from nowhere, from everywhere. The crucifix snapped in her trembling hands, and at that sound, the air changed. A low vibration rippled through the wood. The choir's heads tilted up in unison. Not fast, slow, graceful, dreadful. Their eyeless faces turned toward her. Amara stumbled back, her breath ragged. The hum grew louder, vibrating in her chest like a second heartbeat. Then one by one, the mouths that weren't there began to open. Sound poured out. Not song. Not scream. Something between the two, a hollow chorus that made the candle flame shrink to a pin of light. The walls seemed to breathe with them, the loft pulsing like a throat trying to form words long forgotten. Amara clutched her cross and shouted, "Stop! In the name of Christ, stop!" The chorus ceased instantly. Every head turned toward her again, but this time, they smiled. She couldn't see it, yet she felt it, a wave of cold satisfaction pressing against her mind. From below, the great organ answered with a single, resonant chord. The faceless choir began to sing once more. But now their hymn had changed, slower, deeper, woven with her name in every verse. Amara. Amara. She ran. Down the stairs, across the nave, breathless and shaking, the hymn following her like a living shadow. Only when she reached the courtyard did she dare to look back. In the tall window of the choir loft, she saw the girl in the white veil, standing among the faceless singers, her hollow eyes turned downward. And on the glass, in the reflection of the flickering light, Amara saw something that turned her blood to ice. She wasn't alone. Another face, her own, was among the choir now. Episode 5, The Girl in the White Veil. The storm had passed, but the rain refused to leave. It fell in soft, endless threads, drumming on the roof of Saint Luria like 1,000 whispered prayers. Sister Amara sat alone in the chapel, her candle a trembling star amid the dark. Sleep had not touched her in days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them, the faceless choir, and heard her name stretched into a song that was not meant for the living. She had tried to pray, but the words curdled in her throat. The cross around her neck felt heavier now, colder, as if something inside the metal was listening. Then came the sound. A single note, faint, childlike, drifting from the nave. She rose slowly, the candle flame bending with her breath. The sound came again, a girl's voice humming the same cursed melody. When Amara stepped into the nave, she saw her. A small figure stood by the altar, bathed in moonlight leaking through the crack-stained glass. The white veil draped over her form shimmered like frost, but beneath it, no face could be seen, only the faint outline of features blurred, as if hidden behind smoke. "Who are you?" Amara whispered. The girl tilted her head. When she spoke, her voice echoed like two bells striking at once, one near, one impossibly far away. "You heard us sing." Amara gripped the pew for balance. "What are you? Why me?" The girl took a step forward, her bare feet making no sound on the marble floor. You came when no one else would. You opened the door again. What door? The girl lifted a trembling hand and pointed toward the choir loft above. Her sleeve fell back, revealing pale skin covered in faint burn marks, as though she had once reached for a candle and never let go. The hymn is not a song, she said. It is a promise. Amara's voice cracked. A promise to whom? The girl's tone changed, no longer childlike, but ancient, echoing with sorrow. To him. And before Amara could ask who, the cathedral filled with the smell of smoke. The air shimmered, and in an instant, the world around her dissolved into flame. She wasn't in Saint Luria anymore. She stood in a grand cathedral from centuries past, walls golden, organ gleaming, a living choir singing under the direction of a young priest, Father Corvin. His hands trembled as he raised the baton. The girl in white was among them, alive, her voice angelic, her eyes closed in pure devotion. Then, mid-hymn, the candle behind her toppled. Fire leapt across the choir stalls. Panic erupted. The organ screamed. Smoke consumed everything. The priest tried to save them, but the hymn did not stop. The choir kept singing as the flames devoured their bodies. Amara fell to her knees, gasping. Stop it, she cried. Please, stop. And just like that, the fire vanished. The cathedral was dark again. The girl stood before her once more, veil still white, untouched by flame. She reached out a stitched hand, the threads glinting like silver beneath the candlelight, and placed it gently on Amara's shoulder. We sang to reach heaven, she whispered, but he never answered. So now, we sing alone. Amara trembled, tears blurring her vision. How do I free you? The girl turned toward the altar. Beneath the veil, her lips barely moved. Finish what Father Corvin began. The church bells tolled suddenly, 12 long, thunderous strikes. By the last chime, the girl was gone. Only the veil remained, draped across the altar, still warm, still humming softly. Amara touched it. And for a heartbeat, she heard her own voice singing within it. Episode 6, Confessional Echoes. By the third night, Sister Amara had stopped trying to convince herself she was awake. Whether dream or curse, Saint Luria was no longer a place of worship, it was a wound that never closed. She walked through the nave clutching the white veil the ghostly girl had left behind. It pulsed faintly in her hands, warm like living skin, humming the same melody she could no longer forget. Everywhere she went, the hymn followed, in the creak of pews, the drip of water from the ceiling, even in her own heartbeat. Amara's faith had once been her armor. Now it was her prison. The confessional stood near the back of the church, small, wooden, half-rotted, like a relic of a sin no one wanted to remember. Its curtain fluttered though the air was still. She entered. The door groaned shut behind her, sealing her in the narrow dark. Forgive me, Father, for I have doubted, she began, her voice trembling. I've seen the dead sing. I've heard a child without eyes call my name. And I fear God has left this place. Silence. Only the faint rustle of breath came through the screen. Then a voice answered. It was calm. Deep. Gentle. But wrong. God never leaves, child. Only the living do. Amara froze. The voice was not Father Darius. It carried the tone of someone long dead, someone who had sung his last note in this very cathedral. Father Corvin, she whispered. The confessional trembled. The wood creaked as though something shifted inside the wall. The voice returned, now layered, like several people speaking through one throat. You opened the veil. You let the hymn breathe again. Amara pressed her hand against the screen. I didn't mean to. Tell me how to end it. End, the voice said, almost laughing. There is no end to prayer. Only silence between verses. Suddenly, the air grew colder. The small window inside the booth slid open by itself, and a gust of breath, wet, rotten, washed over her. A hand appeared behind the mesh, pale and skeletal, clutching a rosary that dripped with dark water. Amara's voice cracked. What do you want from me? The answer came not from one mouth, but from many. Confess. The rosary rattled. From the walls came the faint hum of the choir, low and rising. Each note pressed tighter around her chest. She obeyed, maybe from fear, maybe from faith. I doubted the church, she said. I doubted his mercy. I wanted proof, something real. The voices whispered in unison, and now you have it. The wall between them glowed faintly, the grain of the wood burning with lines of light until words appeared, Latin phrases etched in fire. Cantate, ite non tacibitis. Sing, and you shall not be silent. Amara's heartbeat thundered in her ears. You mean, if I sing, I join you? No answer. Only a slow inhale, like the confessional itself drawing breath. Then a whisper, soft, close enough to brush her ear. Your voice was chosen long before you arrived. The light vanished. The booth fell silent. Amara pushed the door open and stumbled into the nave. Every candle in the cathedral had relit, forming a trail of flickering gold leading to the altar. On the altar lay the veil again, but this time, words had appeared upon it, written in blood-colored ink. Deliverance begins where the voice breaks. She lifted it carefully. Beneath it, she found something that hadn't been there before, a confession parchment sign in trembling ink. Lucian Corvin. Forgive me, Lord. I made angels of the living. The bells tolled once, deep and final. And from the shadows of the choir loft, a single, echoing voice sang her name, not in mockery, but in welcome. Amara. Episode 7, The Hymnal That Bleeds. The next day, the smell of wax and iron filled the air. Rain had turned the streets of Saint Luria into veins of black glass, and the cathedral stood like a great heart that refused to die. Sister Amara spent the morning cleaning the altar, hoping that doing something ordinary might anchor her to reality. But the hymnal refused to stay silent. It lay on the pew where she had left it the night before, an old, leather-bound book with edges frayed like burned lace. When she opened it, she froze. The notes on the page had changed. Yesterday, it had been Psalm 47. Now, the ink had spread, rewriting itself into a melody she had never seen before. The notes glistened wetly in the candlelight. She touched the page, her finger came away crimson. Blood. The book pulsed once, like something alive, then stilled. Amara staggered back. A droplet of red ink slid across the page, curling into words beneath the staves. Sing, and be remembered. Her breath caught. Across the nave, the other hymnals began to open one by one, their covers creaking like old coffins. Pages fluttered, and faint voices murmured beneath the sound, whispers, sighs, half-formed verses carried on unseen breath. Then, all at once, the whispers aligned. A single, collective word rippled through the air. Sanctus. The candles bent toward the pews, their flames reaching for the hymnals as if drawn by invisible singers. Wax dripped in thick, red streams onto the floor. Amara clutched her cross and shouted, "Stop this!" But the hymn only grew louder, ink seeping from the books and snaking across the floorboards, tracing circles around her feet. The bloodlines connected, forming a sigil, complex, elegant, and burning faintly with gold light. At its center, her shadow trembled and split in two. The smaller one lifted its head. Her own face stared back at her from the shadow, lips moving soundlessly. Then it spoke in a voice that was hers, but older, cracked, exhausted. He wrote it in his own blood. Who? Amara gasped. Corvin. The hymn was his repentance. Every verse another soul he damned. Her reflection reached upward from the floor, hand brushing her ankle, leaving a streak of cold across her skin. Amara grabbed the hymnal and slammed it shut. The whispers died instantly. The sigil faded, leaving only the faint metallic scent of blood and candle smoke. But the silence that followed was worse. From somewhere above the loft, the organ, came a soft drip. She looked up. Blood. Thin, dark, and steady. It dripped from the ceiling beams, falling onto the altar below. With every drop, the air seemed to tighten, like a throat preparing to sing. Then she heard it, faint but distinct, the click of organ keys. She turned toward the choir loft. No. The first notes of Hymnus Aeternum filled the church again, but now each chord came with a new sound, the tearing of paper, the wet slide of ink across wood, the hiss of breath between verses. Amara's candle went out. She stood in the dark as the hymn swelled, the unseen choir rising in mournful unity. The floor beneath her feet vibrated with each word. Deliver us. Deliver us. And then a final line, whispered directly into her ear though no one was near her. Deliver us through you. Amara ran to the altar, slammed the bleeding hymnal shut, and hurled it into the fire of the nearest candle stand. Flames leapt high, hissing, devouring the book. But as it burned, the pages screamed. Every note of the hymn escaped as smoke. The fire turned black. When the last ember died, the ash that remained spelled one sentence across the stone. The song remembers the voice that silenced it. Amara backed away, trembling. Outside, the bells began to ring again. But this time, each chime carried her own voice singing back at her from the fog. Episode 8, The Dead Man's Organ. The night Saint Luria lost its silence, the wind came from the sea cold, heavy, and singing. Sister Amara had learned not to trust the quiet, for in Saint Luria, silence was only the breath before the hymn began again. The church smelled of rain and burnt parchment from the hymnal she had cast into the fire. Yet, even its ashes hummed faintly in the air. She had locked every door, barred every window, and prayed until her lips bled. Still, the sound came. At first, it was faint, a low murmur from the walls, the sigh of air through ancient pipes. Then it grew. A single note, pure, drawn out, vibrating the glass and the stained windows. It was the organ. Amara's candle flickered violently. She turned toward the loft, heart pounding. The keys moved on their own, slow at first, then faster, as if an unseen hand were waking from centuries of sleep. The pipes breathed. The melody that emerged wasn't human, it bent and stretched like a body in pain, every note sliding against the next until it formed something beautiful and wrong. The hymn from Father Corvin's day, rewritten, darker. She climbed the stairs to the loft, each step groaning beneath her weight. The closer she got, the stronger the sound became, not just from the pipes, but from within the walls, as though the cathedral itself were singing. When she reached the top, she stopped breathing. The organ bench was not empty. A figure sat there robed in black, its back to her, shoulders rising and falling with each note. Its fingers danced across the keys, moving with impossible grace. The air around it shimmered faintly, distorting like heat. Father Corvin, she whispered. The music faltered one missed note, then continued, slower now, almost gentle. She took a step closer. Why are you playing? A voice answered without turning. Deep. Familiar. Echoing from everywhere and nowhere. Because the hymn must never end. Amara's candle dimmed. The flame bent toward him as if drawn by breath. She saw, now, that the robe wasn't black, it was soaked, as though the fabric had been dipped in ink and never dried. "I burned the hymn," she said, her voice trembling. "It's over." The figure laughed softly, and the pipes answered in harmony. "You cannot burn memory, child." Suddenly, every key on the organ depressed at once, a thunderous roar shaking the cathedral. The windows shattered. Candles burst. Amara fell to her knees, hands over her ears, but the sound went through her bones. Beneath the organ's screen, she heard it, 100 voices singing from inside the pipes. She looked up. The air that poured from the organ pipes shimmered red, misty, thick, pulsing with faces. The choir. Their mouths moved, their voices rising in perfect agony, trapped within the metal, each note a soul crying for release. Amara crawled forward, screaming over the music. "What do you want from me?" The answer came as a whisper that shook the floorboards. "To finish the hymn." The organ's topmost pipes burst open. Out spilled a stream of black feathers, burning as they fell, dissolving into ash before touching the ground. Amara stood, shaking, the crucifix clutched to her chest. "If I finish it, will you rest?" The figure finally turned. What sat before her had no face, only the hollow imprint of one, a smooth void where eyes and mouth should be. Yet, she felt its gaze pierce her. It lifted one hand, pointing to the music sheet before it, inked freshly in red, the notes still wet and glistening. At the bottom, beneath the final bar, was written in delicate script. "The last verse awaits its singer." The figure faded, the robe collapsing into dust upon the bench. The organ fell silent. Only the paper remained, glowing faintly in the candlelight. Amara picked it up, heart pounding. The title read, Hymnus Aeternum, Part 2. And at the bottom, written in blood not yet dry, was her name. Episode 9, The Portrait of the Fallen Choir. The rain had stopped, but the cathedral still wept. Droplets fell from the rafters like tears, sliding down the marble pillars, gathering in the cracks of the floor where the choir once stood. The air smelled of wax, iron, and sorrow. Sister Amara wandered the nave with the blood-written sheet clasped to her chest. The music refused to fade even in silence, the notes pulsed faintly, whispering against her heartbeat. Her name, written in red ink, stared back at her like a prophecy. She wanted to destroy it. But something deeper, darker, told her not to. That evening, as dusk bled through the stained glass, she noticed a painting she had never seen before. It hung behind a curtain near the northern transept, half hidden by decades of dust and neglect. The fabric looked freshly disturbed, as though someone had just passed through it. Amara hesitated, then pulled the curtain aside. Behind it, the portrait revealed itself, enormous, spanning nearly the height of the wall. It showed the original choir of Saint Luria, 33 singers in gleaming robes, standing behind Father Corvin. Their faces were serene, radiant with devotion. But the longer she looked, the less serene they seemed. The smiles were too still. The eyes too knowing. And at the center, Corvin's painted gaze seemed to follow her wherever she moved. At the bottom of the frame, a brass plate read, The Choir Triumphant, 1847. The paint shimmered faintly, still wet in places, though the portrait had to be over a century old. Amara's fingers brushed the lower edge. The moment her skin touched the frame, a faint hum began. The same familiar melody. She stumbled back. The candlelight trembled. The figures in the painting began to move. Their mouths parted, first the sopranos, then the tenors, each one mouthing silent words that she could almost hear in her head. Their voices seeped from the canvas, weaving together into the ghostly harmony that haunted her nights. Then, one by one, their faces began to fade. The paint melted, dripping like tears down the canvas, until only Corvin's figure remained clear. His eyes seemed alive now, deep wells of pain staring directly at her. And slowly, almost tenderly, his painted lips moved. "You opened the hymn." Amara dropped her candle. "No." The voice came again, louder, from both the painting and the air itself. "You let it remember." She stepped back, trembling. The portrait began to shift, brushstrokes swirling, shapes reforming. When the movement stopped, she saw something new at the edge of the choir. A new figure. It was her. Her likeness had appeared in the painting, head bowed, hands folded, eyes half-closed as if mid-song. The resemblance was perfect, down to the scar on her wrist from when she first arrived at Saint Luria. Her stomach twisted. "No. I'm not one of you." The choir's eyes turned toward her all at once. 100 painted stares pierced through the veil between the living and the dead. From deep inside the walls, the organ began to breathe again, low, rumbling, the pipes groaning like something alive. The hymn returned. Soft at first. Then louder. And as it swelled, she saw the faces in the painting begin to move again, singing, not painted now but real, their mouths shaping sound that shook the air. Amara screamed, covering her ears, but she still heard it inside her skull, every word, every note, as if she were the one singing it. Then she saw it, a small signature in the bottom corner of the painting, glowing faintly in the candlelight. L. Corvin and those who followed. Beneath it, a fresh line of pain formed itself before her eyes. Amara, the final voice. The organ's final chord thundered, shaking the cathedral. When the echoes died, the painting was still again. But her reflection, in the glass covering the frame, was gone. Episode 10, The Nun Who Couldn't Pray. By dawn, the bells had stopped. But something inside Sister Amara had not. Her voice, once steady in prayer, had begun to tremble each time she tried to speak the name of God. The words caught in her throat like ash, and when she forced them out, only a thin hum escaped, the same single note that haunted Saint Luria's nights. The hymn was inside her now. She felt it in her pulse, in the small flutter beneath her ribs, in the tremor of her fingertips whenever she touched the crucifix. The melody whispered to her like a second heartbeat, constant and patient. She had not prayed aloud in 3 days. That morning, Father Darius found her kneeling before the altar, lips moving soundlessly. "Sister," he said gently, "you must rest." She turned to him, eyes hollow with sleeplessness. "I can't," she whispered, or tried to. The words came out broken, half-formed, like breath frozen mid-note. Darius frowned. "You've lost your voice?" Amara nodded. He crossed himself, glancing nervously at the great organ above them. "The devil mimics music, sister. That is how he enters. Through beauty that turns to grief." Amara wrote in the dust with her finger, "It's not the devil." "What, then?" he asked. She looked up at the stained glass, light pouring through in fractured colors, and traced another word. "God." Father Darius recoiled. "Blasphemy." But Amara only smiled faintly. Because somewhere deep down, she believed it. No demon could create something so beautiful, so full of sorrow. Only a broken God would. That night, she tried to pray again. Her candlelight swayed as she knelt before the confessional, the wooden lattice cold against her forehead. She opened her mouth, silence. Tried again, nothing. And then, faintly, a whisper answered from the other side. "You cannot pray because you are no longer asking." She froze. It was not Darius. It was the voice she had heard before, gentle, timeless, echoing from within the hymn itself. "You are listening," it said. "That is the beginning." Her heart pounded. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her throat burning. "I am the rest between verses. The silence that remembers the song." The organ began to hum in the distance, soft at first, then louder, filling the air with trembling resonance. Amara covered her ears, but it wasn't sound anymore. It was inside her head. Each pulse of the organ drew her closer to it, every note a thread tugging her soul forward. She stumbled to her feet, following the vibration like a moth drawn to flame. Up the stairs, through the loft, past the pews where the faceless choir once sat. The organ waited. Its keys moved gently, pressing themselves, playing a slow and mournful hymn that seemed to breathe her name into every measure. The pipes exhaled with sorrow, like lungs that had waited too long to sing again. Amara's hands trembled. She reached out, touching the wood of the organ. It was warm. And then, the sound stopped. Utter silence. A whisper followed. "Now, sister, sing." Her lips parted. She wanted to refuse, to pray instead, to speak anything holy, but no words came. Only melody. Soft at first. Then stronger. The same hymn. The same cursed beauty. The organ joined her, its pipes alive once more, echoing her voice through every corner of Saint Luria. She tried to stop, but her body no longer obeyed. Her tears fell into the keys, turning red as they touched the wood. The candles flared. The painting below began to glow, and in its center, the figure of Sister Amara lifted her head and opened her mouth. Singing. Perfectly in tune. When the last note faded, the cathedral was silent again. Father Darius entered minutes later, breathless from the storm outside. The organ was still. The pews empty. Only one sound remained, a faint hum rising from the altar. The sound of a woman's voice, trapped forever between prayer and song. Episode 11, The Midnight Procession. The town of Saint Luria had forgotten how to sleep. By the 11th night, the hymn was no longer confined to the cathedral walls, it had seeped into the cobblestones, into the mist, into the bones of the living. No one could explain it. No one dared to try. The fishermen at the harbor said they heard at first a faint chorus drifting over the water just before midnight, too distant to be human, too beautiful to be safe. The same melody Father Corbin's choir had sung on the night they died. And then, the townspeople began to walk. From her window in the rectory, Sister Amara watched them emerge from their homes, one by one, barefoot, candle in hand, faces calm, eyes vacant. They moved as if guided by invisible strings, each step perfectly in rhythm with the melody only they could hear. The hymn called to them, and they obeyed. Amara pressed her trembling hand against the glass. "Lord, what have I done?" she whispered, her voice still weak, still broken. The procession moved toward the cathedral, silent but for the sound of the hymn carried on the wind. Their candles burned without flicker, the flames steady, unnatural. She could see Father Darius among them, his eyes open, unblinking, lips moving soundlessly. He led the line toward the great doors of Saint Luria, which swung open before they even reached them. Inside, the organ began to play itself again. Amara ran through the rain-soaked streets, the cold cutting through her robe like glass. When she reached the steps of the cathedral, the doors closed behind her with a slow, echoing thud. The nave was filled with people, townsfolk, young and old, kneeling in perfect rows, their candles raised high. The hymn poured from their throats, yet none of their mouths moved. It wasn't singing. It was possession. Amara's heart pounded. "Stop. Please," she cried, her voice rasping into the darkness. But the sound of her own plea was swallowed by the music. At the altar, the painting of the fallen choir shimmered again. The faces turned toward her, 33 souls, now joined by new ones. Familiar ones. The baker. The fisherman. The children from the orphanage. All painted now, their eyes glowing faintly gold. Amara fell to her knees, clutching her crucifix. Why me? Why my voice? The organ answered. A single booming chord that shook the stained glass until cracks webbed across the saints. The choir's voice rose higher, their harmony no longer human, a blend of worship and wailing, joy and torment. And above it all, a single pure note rang out. Amara looked up. The girl in the white veil stood atop the altar steps, the hem of her dress drifting as though in water. She held the same candle she had left behind in life, the flame burning blue. You finished the verse, she said softly, her voice echoing through every corner of the cathedral. Now the living remember. Amara shook her head, tears streaking her face. This isn't remembrance, it's damnation. The girl tilted her head, smiling with something like sorrow. Heaven forgot us, sister. You gave us a voice again. She lifted her hand, and the townspeople rose as one, their faces tilted toward the vaulted ceiling where the cracked glass now glowed with ghostly light. Outside, the bells began to toll, not 12 times, but 33. Each chime called another voice from the grave. Each voice joined the song. By dawn, the streets were empty again. The candles had burned down to puddles of wax. Father Darius was never seen after that night. But those who passed Saint Luria's cathedral swore they could still hear the procession, hundreds of footsteps moving in rhythm to a song that had no end. And if one stood too close to the great door, sometimes, a whisper would come from the keyhole. The next verse is yours. Episode 12, Letters from the Vatican. By the 12th night, Saint Luria had gone still again. No sound, no footsteps, no echo, as if the cathedral itself was holding its breath. Sister Amara had not left her chamber in 2 days. She feared what waited in the silence, and worse, what might be waiting inside her. The hymn lived within her pulse now, faint, steady, an unholy metronome. She prayed for release, but even her prayers had learned the melody. Then came the knock. A single, deliberate rap on the rectory door. When Amara opened it, she found a courier drenched from the storm, clutching a sealed envelope marked with the Vatican sigil, the papal cross, pressed in deep red wax. For you, sister, he said softly. His eyes didn't meet hers. They said it was urgent. Before she could speak, he turned and fled down the path without another word. Amara broke the seal. Inside lay a letter, yellowed, the ink faded but unmistakably written in Latin. The signature at the bottom froze her blood. Father Lucien Corvin. But that was impossible. He had been dead for more than a century. To whoever serves Saint Luria after me. If this reaches you, the hymn has awakened again. It does not die, it sleeps until faith finds its echo. Do not let it reach Rome. They will call it a miracle. They will make it holy. And when the world sings it, heaven will fall silent. L. Corvin. The paper trembled in her hands. The words seemed to move, letters shifting faintly like insects under the page. She turned it over and gasped. A photograph had been pressed between the folds. It showed the interior of Saint Luria, taken from the choir loft. The strange thing wasn't the setting. It was the date written on the back, October 23, 2025, yesterday. Amara's breath caught. The photo was impossibly recent. She looked closer. The image was grainy but clear enough, the choir stalls, the altar, the faint light of candles, and standing in the center of it all was her sister Amara, head bowed, hands folded, eyes closed in prayer. Except she had no reflection. No shadow. Someone had taken this picture, someone who shouldn't exist. That night, she placed the letter on the altar beside the white veil and the blood-written sheet of music. Together, they felt like pieces of a puzzle built by a dead man's hand. Thunder shook the stained glass. The candles bent and flickered as if in warning. Then she heard it again, a soft rustle from the confessional booth. She turned slowly. Through the thin lattice window, she saw a figure sitting inside, robed, head bowed. "Father Darius," she called. No reply. She stepped closer. "If you can hear me, please, we must leave this place." The figure lifted its head. The candlelight reached the lattice, and she saw the face. Father Corvin. Alive. Or something wearing his shape. His eyes burned faintly red, like dying embers under ice. When he spoke, his voice echoed from both the booth and the organ pipes above. "You read my warning." Amara's knees weakened. "It was your hand that cursed them." He shook his head slowly. "Not cursed. Preserved. Every prayer the church forgot became my hymn. I asked for forgiveness, and God answered with silence. So I made the silence sing." "Then why me?" she whispered. Corvin smiled, a slow, mournful curve. "Because you still believe he's listening." Before she could speak, the booth went dark, and when the candle flared again, the seat was empty. Only the letter remained, now rewritten in fresh, wet ink. "The hymn has found its last voice." Beneath it, another line appeared as she watched, drawn by an invisible hand. "It will begin at midnight." The bells of Saint Luria began to toll. Once. Twice. Amara turned toward the altar and saw that the letter was no longer on it. It was in her hand. And the ink was still dripping. Episode 13, The Choirmaster's Diary. The storm had turned the air electric, alive with whispers that seemed to come from the stones themselves. Sister Amara moved through the cathedral with a candle in one hand and the Vatican letter in the other, her breath misting in the cold. Every time she blinked, she saw his face, Father Corvin, sitting in that confessional, speaking words that had never left her mind. I made the silence sing. Now she needed to know how. She searched his tomb again, this time tearing away the cracked marble and rotted boards until her fingers found the hollow space beneath. Dust rose like breath from a corpse. Inside was a small wooden box, bound with iron clasps. The seal bore the same sigil as the letter, Corvin's initials, entwined with a cross inverted by time. Amara broke it open. Inside lay three things. A rosary of black bone. A silver crucifix split down the middle. And a leather-bound journal, its cover blistered with age, the title burned into it by hand. The Diary of the Choirmaster. The first page was written in a trembling, urgent hand. To the one who will read this after I am gone, forgive what I have done in God's name. The hymn was never meant to save, it was meant to remember. Every voice that sang it bound itself to me. I took their pain, their faith, their fear, and made of it a door. But heaven never opened. Only the echo did. The ink bled where tears or blood had fallen. Amara turned the page. They came to me as children, pure and willing. We sang for rain, for mercy, for deliverance from the plague that stole our families. When the rain fell, the elders called it divine. They did not see what I saw, the faces in the water. They were listening. They wanted more. The candle flickered. A drop of wax splattered across the margin, but she could still read the next line. When their voices broke, I promised them eternity. I wrote the hymn with my blood so they would never fade. I gave them what heaven would not, endless praise. Endless song. Endless faith. Her hands shook. You damned them, she whispered. You caged them in music. The cathedral seemed to breathe in response. A low hum rose from the choir loft, faint at first, then swelling into harmony. The pages of the diary trembled, fluttering as though turned by unseen hands. Amara clutched it close, forcing them still. Show me everything. The ink on the final entry glowed faintly, as if written moments ago. One voice remains unsung, the voice of the one who will finish the hymn. The church will send her. Faith will guide her. She will open the last verse with her own breath. When she does, the song will find its end, and with it, the world's silence will begin. A shiver crawled through her. Beneath the last line, a new one formed before her eyes, the ink blooming like veins through the paper. Her name is Amara. The candle snapped out. In the darkness, she felt warmth on her fingertips. When she lifted her hand, the ink from the page was still wet, fresh and red. Then came the sound. Soft, deliberate, the turning of a page behind her. She spun around, heart pounding. The diary in her hands was still open. The sound had come from the altar. Another book identical rested there now, its cover breathing faintly as if alive. Her candle flared back to life by itself. On the altar book's open page, new words appeared, written slowly by invisible fingers. Finish the hymn, sister. The final note waits in your throat. Her breath caught. She could feel it, something rising within her chest, pressing against her ribs like wings trying to unfold. The choir loft began to glow faintly, each faceless figure lifting its head. They were waiting. When the bells tolled midnight, Amara whispered the first note of the hymn and the cathedral answered back. Episode 14, Silence Before the Mass. The bells of Saint Luria had become the heartbeat of the town. Each night they tolled, and each morning they fell silent again, leaving behind a stillness that felt less like peace and more like waiting. But tonight, Amara would stop them. She believed if she silenced the bells, the hymn would die with them. The sky was bruised with storm clouds, the moon nothing but a pale scar behind them. Amara climbed the narrow tower staircase barefoot, her candle flickering wildly with every gust that slipped through the cracks in the stone. The air smelled of rust, of rain, of time itself. With each step, she could hear the hymn faintly pulsing through the walls, low, rhythmic, like a choir humming beneath the earth. At the top, she found the great bells, 3 of them, blackened by centuries, hanging from iron beams that groaned softly with age. She reached for the rope. The moment her hand touched it, warmth shot through the cord like a living pulse. The rope tightened around her wrist. The bells tolled once. Amara stumbled backward as the sound rolled through her body like thunder. From below, the cathedral responded, the organ roaring to life, the faceless choir lifting their heads as one. No, she gasped, covering her ears. Not again. But the bells were no longer under her control. They moved on their own, the ropes thrashing like serpents, the sound swelling, deafening, divine. She screamed, but her voice was lost in the noise. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The bells hung still. The ropes hung limp. The world held its breath. A silence fell so absolute it pressed against her chest like weight. Even the wind had vanished. And in that silence, she heard something worse than the hymn. A whisper. Do you know what silence is, sister? Amara turned. Father Corvin stood in the tower doorway, his robes dripping shadow, his eyes pale as bone. It is not the absence of sound, he said, stepping closer. It is the sound of everything that has stopped praying. Amara backed away, gripping her cross. You're not real. He smiled sadly. Neither is faith, once it's answered. He gestured toward the bells. Do you hear it now? Amara listened and realized the silence wasn't empty. It was singing. 1,000 voiceless murmurs swirled around her, the echo of prayers unfinished, songs cut short. They built into a soft harmony that only the soul could hear. The silence remembers us, Corvin said. Every unanswered prayer, every forgotten hymn. It feeds on those who try to end it. Amara felt the cold climb up her arms, into her throat. She tried to speak, but no sound came. The silence had taken her voice again. Below, through the tower's cracked window, she saw the townspeople gathering outside the cathedral, motionless, eyes lifted, candles unlit. They were waiting. For her. Corvin reached out, placing a translucent hand on her shoulder. His touch burned cold. The Mass will begin soon, he whispered. And you, sister, will give the sermon. Amara shook her head violently, backing toward the bells. I won't sing. Corvin's smile deepened. You already are. She looked down and realized her lips were moving, though she made no sound. Her breath came in rhythm with the silent melody filling the air. Each exhale was a note, each heartbeat another measure. Corvin began to fade, his body dissolving into mist. The world doesn't end in screams, sister, he said softly. It ends in worship. The silence thickened. It wrapped around her like a cloak, pressing against her ears, her eyes, her lungs, until she couldn't tell if she was standing or floating. Then came the first toll of midnight. The bells moved on their own once more, ringing into the void, not in sound, but in feeling, a vibration through the soul. Amara fell to her knees, tears running down her face. The silence sang louder than any choir. And somewhere deep below, the doors of the cathedral opened themselves. The faithful were coming. Episode 15, The Inverted Cross of Saint Luria. The dawn never came. A gray, bruised light hung over Saint Luria, the kind of light that doesn't belong to any hour. The townspeople still stood outside the cathedral, frozen in prayer, their lips unmoving, their eyes turned upward toward the steeple where the bells no longer rang. Inside, Sister Amara descended into the crypt. She carried only a candle, though its flame seemed weak against the darkness that waited below, a darkness thick with the smell of wet stone and something older, something like decay soaked in incense. She followed the whisper of the hymn echoing faintly from beneath the floorboards, a melody buried with the dead. The further she walked, the more the candlelight seemed to recoil, shrinking from what it illuminated. The stairs ended in a small antechamber lined with old coffins stacked along the walls. Their lids bore the names of priests and nuns long forgotten, saints, perhaps, once. But time had blurred the words, leaving only scars in the wood. And in the center of the room stood something new, a cross. It was iron, tall as a man, and bolted upside down into the floor. Its base was blackened, as though it had been burned into the stone itself. Around it lay dozens of rusted chains, rosaries melted into twisted knots, and old hymnals scattered like bones. Amara knelt before it, trembling. "What did you do, Corvin?" she whispered. Her voice didn't echo. Instead, something answered. A low, drawn-out note filled the chamber, not sung, not played, but breathed from the walls. It vibrated through the air, soft at first, then growing into a chorus of voices rising from the coffins around her. The dead were singing again. Amara clutched her cross, backing away. But as she moved, the candlelight flickered across the inverted cross, revealing marks etched into its surface. They weren't scratches. They were words. Latin. Carved deep, bleeding with rust. To lift heaven, one must weigh down the earth. To save the choir, I turned the prayer upside down. Father Corvin's handwriting. She touched the metal and her vision split. For a moment, the crypt wasn't empty. It was alive. She saw them, the 33 singers, kneeling around the same inverted cross, eyes closed, hands clasped. Corvin stood at the center, holding a silver chalice filled not with wine, but with blood. His own. He lifted it to the cross, chanting in a voice both holy and broken. Dona nobis pacem, grant us peace. The air rippled. The cross turned itself. Heaven fell. The song began. Amara stumbled backward, gasping. The vision faded, but not completely. The floor beneath the cross cracked open, and from the split rose a faint glow. Her candle dimmed. A voice drifted upward from the crack, soft and familiar. Sister. She froze. Who's there? The voice came again, clearer now, the girl in the white veil. We're still here. Beneath the prayer. Beneath the silence. Amara's eyes filled with tears. Tell me how to free you. The girl's voice trembled. Turn it back. Amara understood. She wrapped both hands around the cold iron cross and pushed. The metal groaned, resisting, ancient bolts shrieking as she forced it upright inch by inch. The voices rose in agony, the hymn twisting into screams, the candle flaring blood red. With one final cry, she wrenched the cross upright. The light vanished. The song stopped. Everything went still. Amara fell to the ground, gasping, the world silent around her. She could no longer hear the hymn, not in the air, not in her heart. For the first time, there was peace. But then she looked down. The inverted cross now stood upright, but her reflection in its iron surface was upside down. Her own image hung there, smiling faintly, eyes closed, mouth open in song. And from somewhere deep within the floor, a new voice began to hum. Her voice. The silence before the Mass was over. The next hymn had begun. Episode 16, The Hymn Reborn. It began with static. The kind that whispers between radio stations, the soft crackle of electricity searching for a voice. But in Saint Luria, static no longer meant silence, it meant the hymn was finding a way back. 3 days after Amara raised the cross, the town seemed normal. The bells stayed quiet, the fog lifted, and for the first time in months, the sea returned to its steady rhythm. Children played in the square again. People smiled without knowing why. But peace in Saint Luria was a fragile thing. One night, the radio in the caretaker's quarters clicked on by itself. A faint melody leaked through the static, distant, almost soothing. A lullaby made of sighs and hums, too soft to recognize yet too familiar to ignore. By morning, every radio in town was playing it. Sister Amara stood in the nave, the letter from the Vatican still folded inside her robe. She hadn't slept since the cross was raised. Her dreams were filled with sound, not music, not voices, but frequencies. When she entered the cathedral, she froze. The old loudspeakers mounted in the corners, relics from decades ago, crackled to life, humming the same tune as the radios. Father Corvin's hymn. Only now, it was different. Modern. Smooth. Someone had recorded it, rearranged it, as if the cursed melody had found a composer in the living world. The organ answered, playing on its own. The candles shivered. The air grew heavy with resonance, like the cathedral itself was vibrating with every note. Amara whispered, "No. I ended you." The sound twisted in reply, forming words between the waves of static. Songs do not end, sister. They echo. Her knees weakened. What do you want from me? The voice hummed gently, layered now with 1,000 others, men, women, children, each trapped within the broadcast. We want to be heard. The stained glass windows flickered, light pulsing in time with the melody. Through the shifting colors, Amara saw faces reflected, the faceless choir, the girl in the veil, even Father Corvin himself. They were all singing again, their voices transmitted through every speaker, every device. The hymn had escaped the church. That evening, Amara turned on an old radio in the rectory. She tuned through every frequency, 94.2, 102.7, 107.5, all the same. The hymn, playing endlessly. And between the verses, whispers. Some begged for mercy. Others simply called her name. The power went out. The town fell dark. But through the dead silence, every phone, every speaker, every electric hum carried the same unending chorus. Even the winds seemed to sing it now. She lit a single candle and opened Corbin's diary again, desperate for an answer. The final page, the one that had named her, was changing. New lines wrote themselves in fresh ink. The hymn will find new instruments. Faith evolves. You cannot silence what was born to be sung. Her hands trembled as another sentence appeared, one word at a time. It's on the air, sister. The candle flickered out. Outside, lightning cut through the sky, and from every house came the same melody, now louder, clearer, harmonized by unseen voices. Amara ran to the cathedral steps. The sound poured from every direction, blending with the wind and the rain until the whole town vibrated like a single living chord. In the distance, she saw a car pull up near the harbor, its radio blasting the hymn through the storm. The driver sat motionless, eyes open, mouthing the words perfectly in time. Her heart sank. The curse had gone beyond Saint Luria. She fell to her knees in the rain, clutching her cross. The hymn rose, louder, brighter, until it became something almost celestial, almost holy. For a moment, she thought she saw the heavens part. And from that light came Corvin's voice once more, soft and sorrowful. You lifted the cross, sister. You lifted us. Now the world sings in our place. Amara screamed, but the storm swallowed her cry. Above, the radio tower blinked red in the fog, each pulse beating in rhythm with the hymn. The signal had gone global. Episode 17, The Choir of the Living. By the 17th night, the world had become a cathedral. The hymn no longer needed walls or instruments. It lived in airwaves, in machines, in the human breath. Everywhere Amara went, she heard it, a constant hum behind conversations, behind rain, behind the beating of her heart. Children whispered its verses in their sleep. Radios played it even when unplugged. The sea itself seemed to rise and fall to its rhythm. And now, she was not the only one who knew it was alive. A small group had gathered inside Saint Luria, the last who still believed silence could be restored. Men, women, nuns, even a few strangers who had followed the sound here from distant cities. They called themselves the Living Choir. Amara stood before them, pale and exhausted, the letter from the Vatican folded tightly in her hand. Her voice was weak, cracked from nights of prayer that turned into singing without her consent. The hymn has spread, she said, her words trembling. It's in every broadcast. Every signal. But it began here, and here it must end. The group murmured in fear. One of them, a priest with hollow eyes, asked, "And if it cannot end?" "Then we sing it backward," Amara replied. "We undo what was written." They began preparations for the reversal mass. The plan was simple: though madness lived in every part of it. At midnight, they would gather around the altar, each person reciting the hymn in reverse Latin, not to honor God, but to break the chain between heaven and the voices that had stolen its name. The organ would be silent. No instruments. No echo. Only breath. But as they waited for the hour, Amara noticed something wrong. The others had grown too quiet. Their eyes too distant. When she spoke, they turned toward her in perfect unison. And smiled. The clock struck 12. The doors of Saint Luria swung open on their own, letting in a rush of cold air that carried the faint murmur of countless unseen voices. The candles flickered. Amara tried to speak the first line of the reversed hymn, Makapsiban Anod, but the words felt like glass in her throat. From the choir loft above came the soft sound of humming. The others began to hum with it. Not the reversed hymn, the original. One by one, her faithful turned their heads upward, eyes glowing faintly gold in the candlelight. Their voices joined the invisible choir, weaving into the cursed melody with perfect precision. Amara's heart raced. "Stop," she screamed. "You're feeding it." But they didn't hear her, or couldn't. The air vibrated. The walls groaned. The organ keys began to move, though no hands touched them. The living choir was no longer living. Amara ran to the altar and slammed her hands on the crucifix. "God, please help me in this." But even her prayer became music. Each syllable turned to melody, spilling from her mouth in harmony with the others. Her tears fell onto the altar cloth, soaking into it. The fabric began to glow faintly, not with fire, but with the shimmer of light reflected from water. A reflection. Amara looked down and saw not herself, but Father Corvin standing in the reflection below her. His expression was calm, almost gentle. "You can't fight faith, sister," he said from beneath the surface of the vision. "It wants to be sung." She shook her head. "Then I'll sing it to death." Corvin smiled. "That's what I did." She turned toward the others, the possessed faithful, their faces serene as they sang the unending verse. With all her strength, she forced her voice into theirs, but reversed. Each word burned her throat. Her blood tasted like metal. Makapsiban Anod. The air split. The candles went out. For an instant, every sound vanished, no hymn, no wind, no breath. Then a scream, 1,000 screams, ripped through the cathedral, not from mouths, but from the walls themselves. The faithful collapsed to the floor, motionless. Amara stood alone at the altar, chest heaving. The hymn was gone. Or so she thought. A faint hum returned, soft, gentle, from the body of one of the fallen nuns. Then another. And another. The living choir began to rise again. Only now, their song was hers. Amara. Amara. Their voices blended into perfect harmony, a choir not of the dead, but of the living, reborn in sound. And as she fell to her knees, she realized with horror what she had done. She hadn't destroyed the hymn. She had rewritten it. Episode 18, The Voice of the Unforgiven. The hymn no longer came from the church. It came from her. Amara felt it waking inside her ribs, moving through her lungs like smoke with a memory. Every breath she took trembled with a faint vibration, every heartbeat a note of the unending melody. The choir she had tried to destroy was alive within her. 33 voices. 33 souls. And each one whispered a different word for mercy. The town of Saint Luria was empty now. Doors hung open, candles burned down to puddles of wax, and the air was thick with that faint metallic scent that clings to sanctified blood. Amara wandered the nave barefoot, her steps echoing softly on the cold stone. Her reflection in the shattered glass of the altar looked wrong, her lips moved even when she wasn't speaking. "Leave me," she whispered to the echo within her chest. "You've had your song." A dozen voices answered at once, overlapping like waves. "We were never forgiven." She pressed her hands to her ears, but the sound was inside, pulsing through bone. "Then what do you want from me?" The voices merged into one, smooth, calm, tender in its horror. "We want to finish what he refused to hear." That night, the storm returned, the final one, it seemed. Lightning danced over the cathedral's broken spire, striking the cross until it glowed red-hot. The organ began to hum again, though its pipes were cracked and half-melted from fire. Amara collapsed at the altar, clutching her crucifix so tightly the metal cut into her palms. She prayed, not to God, but to the silence. "Please," she whispered, "if there's any mercy left, let me sleep." But mercy was a word the hymn had long forgotten. The candles flared. The walls pulsed with unseen breath. And from the choir loft above came a slow, deliberate sound, footsteps. Amara looked up. The faceless singers were descending the stairs. Their movements were weightless, dreamlike, each one carrying the faint outline of light where a face should be. Behind them came the girl in the white veil, her steps leaving no echo. When she spoke, her voice carried all 33 at once. Heaven turned its ear away. But now we have you. Amara tried to stand, but the air had weight. Her body wouldn't move. The girl reached out and touched her chest. The contact burned, not fire, but revelation. Every voice entered her at once. Amara screamed. The sound that tore from her throat wasn't human, it was music, layered and vast, the same Kirsten transformed into something holy and horrifying. The air shimmered around her, the stained glass trembled, the organ keys pressed themselves down in perfect time with her breath. Her body arched, trembling, as the 33 souls poured through her lungs, their final chorus breaking the barrier between voice and pain. For a moment, she saw what they saw. An endless sky of light, not heaven, but a mirror of it, a realm made from every prayer that was never answered. The voices were trapped there, circling forever, their faith turned to echo. And in the center of that false sky stood Father Corbin, eyes hollow, smiling faintly. "You see it now, sister," he said. "There was never damnation. Only memory." The light collapsed. Amara fell to the floor of the cathedral, the air torn from her lungs. She gasped once, twice, then stilled. The choir around her vanished, not into mist, not into darkness, but into her breath. When she opened her eyes, they glowed faintly gold. At dawn, the people of the neighboring town swore they heard singing carried by the wind, a single, perfect female voice rising over the hills, filled with grief and beauty. Those who followed the sound to Saint Luria found the church door open. Inside, the altar was bathed in light. Sister Amara knelt there, eyes closed, her lips moving in quiet rhythm. No sound came from her mouth, and yet the air around her sang. 33 voices, one body. One prayer that heaven had no place for. The voice of the unforgiven. And in that song, both beautiful and unbearable, the world seemed to hold its breath. Episode 19, The Last Mass. The morning after the storm, Saint Luria stood in perfect stillness. The sea was flat as glass. The air was heavy, too heavy, like the world was holding its breath. The cross atop the cathedral had cracked in half, its shadow now stretched backward across the square like a wound that refused to close. Inside, the pews were empty. The hymn had fallen silent for the first time in living memory. And in that silence knelt Sister Amara. Her skin was pale as marble, her lips bloodless, her eyes glowing faintly with the golden hue of dawn. The hymn had burned itself into her soul, and yet she had not sung since the night before. The world waited for her to begin again. She sat before the altar, surrounded by the remnants of faith, melted candles, broken rosaries, the torn pages of Father Corvin's diary. The inverted cross now stood upright behind her, gleaming faintly in the morning light, its metal whispering as though alive. Amara lifted her head. The choir stalls above her were empty, yet she could feel them, the 33, hovering unseen, their presence thick in the air like incense. She spoke softly, her voice raw and quiet. "Is this what you wanted? To be remembered?" The air responded with a faint hum, low, resonant, mournful. Amara closed her eyes. "Then let me remember you, one last time." She rose and walked to the altar, her bare feet silent against the marble floor. The white veil lay folded there, as it always did, untouched since the night the girl appeared. Now, it glowed faintly with its own light, pulsing to a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. When Amara placed it over her head, the hymn returned. Not loud. Not cruel. But gentle, a river of sound flowing through her veins. The candles flared one by one. The organ awakened. The air trembled with reverence and fear. She began to sing. It was not the cursed melody now. It was something else, the hymn reborn, lifted from its grave. Her voice rose through the cathedral like light through water, filling every corner, every shadow, every crack in the stone. It was the same song that had damned them, and yet, in her voice, it became forgiveness. The faceless choir appeared behind her, their forms faint and shimmering, no longer grotesque but radiant. They sang with her, their tones weaving through hers in a harmony that reached beyond the mortal. Father Corvin's spirit stood in the center aisle, watching with tears of smoke trailing down his hollow cheeks. "You've done what I couldn't," he whispered. "You made heaven listen." But Amara wasn't looking upward. Her gaze was fixed on the people standing outside the cathedral doors, hundreds of them, drawn by the song. They stood in silence, faces uplifted, eyes wide as the melody flowed through them. The world was hearing Saint Luria's hymn for the first time, and perhaps, the last. As the final verse neared, the organ's pipes cracked and glowed. The glass windows rattled, saints and angels painted in colors seeming to move with the vibration of her voice. She felt her body unraveling, her veins turning to gold, her breath to light. The choir's harmony began to fade, one voice at a time. Corvin's voice lingered last. "Finish it, sister." Amara took one final breath. Her voice broke, not from weakness, but from transcendence. The last note echoed longer than sound should live. It hung in the air like a thread between worlds, vibrating through stone, sea, and sky. And then, silence. The veil fell from her head, drifting softly to the ground. Amara was gone. When the people entered the cathedral, they found no trace of her. Only a faint warmth in the air, and on the altar, a single line carved into the marble in blood-red script. "The silence forgives." From that day forward, no bell in Saint Luria ever rang again. But when the wind passed through the valley at dusk, those who listened carefully swore they could still hear a woman's voice, soft, eternal, singing a hymn that finally knew peace. The last mass had ended. And heaven, at last, had heard. Episode 20, Amen, in silence. Years later, they called it the miracle of Saint Luria. Pilgrims came from across oceans to see the cathedral that sang itself into silence. The Vatican called it divine intervention. Scientists called it a sonic anomaly. The townspeople, what few remained, called it by its oldest name, the hymn that never ended. But those who had been there, the ones who saw the light flood through the stained glass and heard the final note tremble through the bones of the earth, knew it wasn't a miracle. It was a farewell. Time had not been kind to Saint Luria. The salt wind had eaten the stone, ivy had climbed over the once holy walls. Yet when the sea was calm, one could still hear something faint rising from the waves, not quite music, not quite voice. A resonance, like breath held between prayers. And if you stood long enough in that soundless air, you might have sworn you heard her name. Amara. A Vatican envoy came to record the sight, a young priest named Matteo who had never seen war but carried the eyes of one who might. He walked through the ruins, dictating notes into his recorder. The altar remains untouched. The cross stands upright. There is a warmth in the air, unexplainable by physics. Locals claim that the song can still be heard near dawn. I hear nothing yet, but it feels like being watched. He stopped before the inscription carved into the marble. The silence forgives. He traced the letters with his hand. The stone hummed faintly beneath his touch, just once, like a heartbeat. He pulled his hand away. No, he whispered. That's impossible. Matteo ventured deeper into the cathedral, his flashlight trembling across the old pews. Dust shimmered in the air like motes of gold, moving as though stirred by something unseen. At the foot of the altar, he found an old veil folded neatly, untouched by time. White still, though everything around it had withered. When he lifted it, the faintest note escaped the air, soft, fragile, beautiful. It echoed through the nave like the breath of someone awakening. And then he heard it. A voice. Father. It came not from the shadows, but from everywhere at once, inside his head, behind his ribs, beneath his pulse. Do you still believe? Matteo froze. Who's there? The air thickened. The candle stubs on the altar flickered to life, one by one, glowing with golden flame. A figure appeared in their light, kneeling, veiled, radiant. Her face was hidden, but her voice was the sound of peace and grief entwined. You came to listen. Matteo's throat tightened. Are you her? The figure tilted her head. Names fade. Songs remain. She rose, moving toward him with a grace untouched by earth. The closer she came, the softer the world became. His heart slowed, his breath matched the rhythm of her steps. Why did you sing? He asked. She paused at the foot of the altar. The veil shimmered in her hands. Because silence forgot us. The wind rushed through the broken windows, carrying with it the faint harmony of distant voices, men, women, children, all singing one word. Amen. The figure looked back once. Tell them, she said. It was never a miracle. It was a confession. Then the light took her. She dissolved into the air like candle smoke, leaving only the echo of her voice and the veil lying in Matteo's hands. Weeks later, the Vatican sealed Saint Luria. They called it a sacred site, forbidden to enter. But Matteo could not forget. At night, in his small room in Rome, he played the recording he had made inside the cathedral. The file was silent at first. Then, faintly, beneath the static, a sound emerged, a voice singing the same melody, only this time accompanied by 1,000 others. And when the final note came, it whispered just one word. Forgiven. Matteo wept. He realized then that the song had never belonged to the dead. It had been written for the living, for those who prayed into silence and heard nothing back. At dawn, the bells of Saint Luria tolled once more. No hands touched them. The sound rolled over the sea, soft and endless, carrying with it the last line of the hymn. Peace is not in heaven, it is in those who sing. And as the waves swallowed the echo, the world returned to quiet. Not the silence of absence, but the silence that forgives. Amen.
Epilogue, the song beneath heaven. It is said that every silence remembers the sound that came before it. And so, long after Sister Amara vanished from Saint Luria, the silence still sang. Decades passed. The cathedral collapsed slowly into the earth, its pillars sinking, its stained glass shattered and buried beneath layers of salt and time. The sea reclaimed the lower crypts, flooding them until the reflection of the cross trembled in black water. The world forgot the name of the town, but not its echo. Sometimes, fishermen along that coast said they could hear something in the distance, a low hum beneath the waves, the sound of a woman's voice carried by the tide. They swore the melody changed with the weather, mournful in the rain, holy at dawn, and unbearably beautiful on the nights when the moon bled red into the sea. No one dared sail close. Those who did never returned. In Rome, the letter from Father Corvin, the one that warned against the hymn, was locked away in the Vatican archives, marked with a seal that read Deus tacet, God is silent. Only one man ever opened it. Father Matteo, the same envoy who found the veil, grew old in quiet obsession. He spent his life studying frequencies of sound, convinced that music was the bridge between the mortal and the divine. He died at 87, his last words whispered into the dark of his monastery cell. She finished the song. Centuries later, Saint Luria was nothing but ruins beneath the sea. Divers searching for relics of old Europe found fragments of the cathedral bells, rusted, fused into coral. And deeper still, they found something stranger, a single human skeleton kneeling upright before a cross, mouth open as if mid-hymn. When they brought it to the surface, the ocean around them changed. The waves began to pulse in rhythm. Every radio on the ship turned on by itself. And through the static came a faint, melodic hum, calm, soft, infinite. A woman's voice. That night, satellites orbiting the Earth picked up an unexplained frequency emanating from the Atlantic. Not mechanical. Not cosmic. A tone, repeating. When translated into musical notation, it matched an ancient hymn. Hymnus Aeternum. The eternal hymn. Some said it was just a magnetic anomaly. Others called it divine interference. But those who listened to the recording long enough began to feel something strange, a weight in their chest, as if the sound were pulling their hearts toward a rhythm they couldn't resist. And when the last note faded, they all heard the same whisper. Peace is not in heaven. It is in those who sing. The world moved on, but the echo remained, not on airwaves, not in memory, but in the quiet spaces between all things. In hospitals, some dying patients swore they heard a choir as their hearts slowed, 33 voices and one woman leading them. In churches, priests sometimes felt the air hum beneath their sermons, as if the walls remembered a faith older than prayer. And in the silence between lightning and thunder, travelers along the coast of Saint Luria still claimed to hear it, faint, eternal, forgiving. If you stand there at dawn, where the cathedral once rose above the sea, you might hear the faint toll of a bell beneath the water. And if you close your eyes, you might imagine her, Sister Amara, standing among the waves, veil drifting, eyes raised not to heaven, but toward something higher still. She does not speak. She only listens. Because in the end, that is what faith was meant to be. Not a voice demanding an answer, but a silence that finally understood. And when the world grows still again, and every song has ended, her hymn will be the last thing left. A sound beneath heaven. A whisper inside eternity. Amen.